of pen testing where they said that although we couldn't crack into the container, had we have been able to in some way or some manner, we noticed you don't block outbound ports when you leave the container. So we added a layer of security into the next round of application, where we added a configurable firewall, so you can actually control outbound traffic that leaves the container, talks out through the host, and then tie that final sort of potential vulnerability down, so you can get the best of every world. You can understand what your app needs, lock everything else down, and just allow the communication traffic to that particular medium. That could be a SQL backend database server. It could be a particular server that you need to gain access to the data. You could lock it down to only being able to communicate with that particular piece. And this is the constructs of how we do it. So on today's demo, we have a virtual cloud edition that runs within Windows Virtual Desktop. But similarly, we have an exe or a DMG or a deb or an RPM file for all the other platforms that are there. And we have two types of container. One for maximum compatibility with really older versions of sort of DOS programs or XP programs that are still being used out in the wild. Which is the DCIX container, or we have one that's designed right up to the very latest Windows 10 builds and all the things that would have compatibility for Windows 7 apps or some of those older legacy apps in that kind of environment. That would be the DCIM container. So really that runs modern and legacy applications, and we take advantage of some hardware acceleration to make those applications perform. You would put all of your configuration inside the container. So you would have governance, you would have policy, you would have your applications. And then once one centralized version is created, we can then mass deploy at scale very easily. Once you've created one, you can then roll that out to thousands of desktops very, very simply using existing tools that you have, maybe SCCM, Intune, Mobile Iron, any application delivery tool they currently use for the end customer, we can integrate with it. I'm going to hand over to Michelle to describe a little bit more around some of the Windows Virtual Desktop recommendations now. Over to you, Michelle. Michelle?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so just to give you a bit more technical background on how this all works. Obviously, from the WVD environment, you get a multi-session or a single session Windows 10 instance. Where you choose to store the droplet container image, which is a flat file that contains all the legacy applications, is really up to you. It could be stored on the local C drive of the Windows 10 environment, or it could be stored on some centralized locations such as Azure files that are AD integrated. We support both hardware acceleration and non-hardware accelerated containers. Typically for customers who want or need hardware acceleration, it's the V4 sized instances, DV4 and EV4, that they'll be looking at on the Intel platform. Can I have the next slide, Barry? We've got two different ways of running what we call user mode and service mode. User mode, the container is started when the user needs the application. Now that's great for applications that are used once a day, once a week, once a month, once a quarter, or even just to access some legacy database that's required for some sort of compliance or auditing purposes. For applications that are used every day, all day, like a call center application, for example, we have a service mode. It's still the same container and it's still the same software. The difference is that when the computer starts, the container starts automatically, and then a small client or agent is really used as the broker to gain access to the container. Remember, this is running all inside the context of the Windows 10 virtual desktop in Microsoft WVD. So it's all encapsulated in the same environment. Next slide, please, Barry. In terms of those runtime modes, it's worth having an idea about what sort of flexibility and scalability that you're going to drive from these environments. So on the left-hand side, we've got the per user model. In the per user model, each user has their own droplet file, droplet container image, and they get their own allocation of memory and CPU to the container. And this drives the maximum flexibility because each user is getting their own container. On the right-hand side is a model that's designed more for scalability than flexibility, where a single container image can support multiple users. Now, the easiest way to understand this is if Windows 10 is multi-session, so can the container. And this sort of marries up, if you like, architecturally with the model of WVD itself. Next slide, please. And from that, it's worth understanding that we have different types of containers. We have a 32-bit container and a 64-bit container. So typically, when the customer opts for the per user model, maximum flexibility, they use the 32-bit container. This offers a maximum of 2 container CPUs and 4 GB of memory. In the shared model on the right-hand side, where multiple users all connect into the same container at the same time, customers often opt for the 64-bit container, mainly because it has very good CPU resource allocation, but mainly the constraining resource is memory in this particular scenario. And the 64-bit container does allow for a maximum of 192 GB of memory, so well within any maximums that anybody would assign to a WVD environment. And typically our system administrators decide what proportion of memory out of their desktop pools, for want of a better phrase, do they carve out to service the needs of legacy applications. So what we're trying to do is create a model by which the customer chooses how they want to deploy Droplet based on their TCO targets and based on the quality of experience that they're trying to drive to the end user. So I'm going to do a demo. So Barry, if you could stop sharing.
Yeah, I think if you just share, you'll actually take over my session.
Yeah, I think I will. So can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Great. So I've got a Azure instance that I've cranked up, which you don't really need to see that. What you really need to see is the end user experience. So on the left here, we've got what's called a Droplet Seamless app. And what we've got here on the right is a native Windows 10 application running in WVD. Obviously, you can tell there's a slight difference between the two because obviously Windows 10 supports the Aeroglass experience that was introduced around the Windows 8 era. From the user's perspective, though, they don't really know that the notepad that's running on the left is actually running in a container. Our container is running on this system. It's in this window here, in this pop-up window in the corner. For the most part, the container will be locked, so end users can't make any changes without knowing the admin password. And for most part, this application will be minimized to the system tray. And what they'll interact with is applications on their desktop, which they will open. So although this copy of Excel looks like it's running locally on Windows 10, it is actually running in the context of our container. So our goal with the current version of the software is to try and get out of the way of the user experience and just service up applications directly within the container without any realization or any understanding of the user about how that is actually delivered. In fact, on this particular version, I've made sure that we're actually running as a service. So that means the container is not started by the end user. It's actually built into the operating system. So in terms of the footprint of what gets exposed to the end user, it's a very small footprint from the end user's perspective. All they get is a tiny little icon in the system tray, and in the main, they will actually integrate or interact with the applications that are on their desktop. We have lots of features built into the container technology, which I've switched on. For example, we have things like copy and paste between the remote app and the local apps, if you like. That's the way I would describe it, or the Droplet Seamless app. We also do things like redirection of client drives. So if somebody wants to save or open a file, when they go about opening and saving files, they can actually see the resources of the Windows 10 environment. And the same goes for things like printing and audio and things like that. All these redirection settings are in fact switched off by default. So we take the security standpoint of all the doors are closed until our system administrators decide to make those applications available. So one last thing I want to show is just how do I make an application available to an end user? So what you might not notice is that actually I did a full install of this legacy Office application. Usually what happens though is that we're looking at bespoke applications or line of business applications that are specific to that particular business rather than off-the-shelf applications like an ancient version of Excel. The main reason I pick something like Excel is everybody recognizes it. It's a recognizable application. So inside the container are many executables, but this UI restricts and limits what the user can see and do inside the container. Once the container is unlocked, I can create what are called application tiles. So I could create a tile for winword.exe. I know that's inside the container, and I can give the user access to that executable based on my decisions as the system administrator. And I can also assign an icon to that particular application as well. Once I'm done, I can lock the container. It's now read-only. You might notice that automatically we've created a shortcut on the end user's desktop for WinWord. So you can see this front end really being more about an administrator controlling what the user can and cannot do in terms of running things inside the container. Another good example of a legacy application that we found often is customers who do need access to an older web browser, mainly because they've got some sort of intranet portal or some sort of web-based application that needs an ancient version of IE and perhaps ActiveX or Java controls to run. So we can securely create a wrapper around these legacy applications to allow them to persist in WVD while customers work on their new application delivery modules that maybe are based on different web browsers. I could spend hours and hours going through all the features and all the things that we can do. And as you might gather, the time that we have allotted today means that I can't go into that level of depth. But what I'm hoping this shows is that we're delivering on the promise that we bring compatibility. We allow our legacy applications to run. We secure those applications by wrapping a security blanket around those applications. And those two components together, security and compatibility, means that customers can be guaranteed that they meet their compliance requirements for things like any cybersecurity kind of project they're part of, and they need to be able to demonstrate to their auditors that they're capable of meeting those requirements. But with that, I will hand back to Barry and open the floor to any questions or any answers that need to be addressed.
There was, Barry, there was one question about, is there any plans to offer iOS or Android versions of Droplet or less demanding Windows apps?
Certainly can do it. So if someone gives me a large enough check to do it, we know how to do it. At the moment, our R&D teams are focused on different areas. With the model that I showed, if I go back to this model here, our application sits as an executable in the different operating systems, and then everything else just works as a flat file. We already know how to create, and it probably take us about 6 weeks to 2 months to create a version of Android or iOS. But no one's yet put the right kind of 1,000 seat, 2,000 seat sort of deal behind it. So we haven't seen the demand. Is the honest answer on it. But yes, certainly, if someone comes to us with the right opportunity, we could have it done.
Thank you.
Raj, I want to hand over to you. I just wanted to, if you wanted to talk about and explain around the licensing model quickly.
Yeah, very quickly. The licensing is subscription based, and it's a monthly subscription with an annual contract, 1 year, 3 year, or 5 years. Um, and to give you an idea, partners will get 40% margin with deal reg. So it's very, very compelling in terms of what a partner can retain. We have a deal reg process, so you are protected, and that deal reg process gives you 25% protection. So we can provide the links to that for authorized partners that actually sign up. We do have licensing for public sector, education, and G Cloud as well. So, if you do work in those sort of environments, then we can offer greater discounts for those types of environments. So it is, very simple and straightforward from a licensing perspective.
Can I just say we've got somebody with their hand up? It's Safran IT. He's got his hand up. I think he might have a question.
Yeah, superb. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very interesting demonstration. Thanks for your time. We're obviously working from a manufacturing background, and the primary concern we can see with the software and the product is how does it work on a pass-through if the machine in question has a physical device attached to it. So we have a lot of non-destructive testing in our environment where the old machine will be connected up to parallel cables, maybe some kind of testing device. If we were to use your containers, how does that then pass through any kind of signaling through to the COM ports or to any kind of physical connections?
Yeah, so absolutely we do that. We have a lot of use cases around that within NHS and in defence and military, where they have serial cables passing through to the device, or it could be a big scanner in the case of the NHS. That would be more on a local piece. Obviously, today we focused on Windows Virtual Desktop and the presentation around how we integrate with that particular piece. But no, from a manufacturing point of view, that would be on the physical side to what we do. So you would install Droplet onto a modern Windows 10 or Linux or machine, and then we would be able to pass through those USB or serial or parallel connections through to our container, and you then integrate in the normal way you would, but obviously updating the security.
Excellent. And just for our own sanity, how does the pass-through work? What technology does that use?
We literally pass the host to guest technology. We translate back to Ethernet and translate through to our container.
Nicely understood. Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Thank you.
No worries.
There's a question for Jonathan Darcy as well.
Yeah, I have a question. Just it's really around the support model for Droplet in terms of, is it a follow the sun approach? Where would support be located? And the reason I ask is we would have a lot of global customers, so that's an area that's come up a few times. So I'd be interested to know the model there.
Yeah, we have followed the sun. So we have engineers right the way that support us from New Zealand, and we have Mexico, we have local territory here. So we have a chase the sun model. The model that we have within the partner program is, in most cases, within the Droplet technology, and touch wood, we've got very large deployments now, and our phones don't ring hard. Because it's a container technology. Once it's captured inside the container and you have your gold images, it's very easy to actually support. Even in the worst case scenarios where something really goes wrong, you re-download the container image and away you go. You're back to the state that you started. So support is very easy, but we pass that over to our partners in the first instance. So first line support, second line support is taken care of by yourselves as the partners, because typically what it tends to be is application support, and obviously we're doing nothing different. We're not changing the support model either for applications. So in the main, most support calls that get through are to do with the application and not to do with Droplet. And then as line 3, obviously we step in and support that from there. we can, if you're an organization that perhaps hasn't got the scale or capability to take care of that, we do interact with third parties as well that can take on board that support.
Perfect. Thank you.
No worries.
Another question from Thibault. Can you control user access to droplet apps via AD security groups?
Yeah, I'll take that. The UI that basically skins the application